Hello, happy Monday. Welcome back to Ask Amy. I have a question today from Diana. But before I get to that, I just want to mention that if you missed the free class that I taught last week on the Little School of Big Change, how so many people have found change and freedom from unwanted habits and anxiety and other issues over the 5 years that the school's been running, you can catch the replay of that class at the link that I put in the description here. So it's dramyjohnson.com/5 years, I believe. But the replay of that class is there if you want to check it out. And it was really great, so I recommend it. Okay, so Diana says, first of all, I can't remember when I last wrote you to say how you and the Little School of Big Change have changed my life, but it just gets better and better as you said it would. I feel like a different person now to even a few months ago, and certainly to a few years ago. I will always be so grateful. That's awesome. She says, I've been applying for new jobs and almost everywhere have come up against employers looking at my past medical history and a stint of what they'd class as mental health issues and questioning whether or not I'll be resilient enough to cope with a stressful job. Sorry, I'm going to turn my fan off here really quick. Okay. I feel that I can cope with anything, but sadly, everyone else is blinkered, it seems, by my past. So how can I explain how different your vision of everything is? Recently, I was trying to explain how I believe that I have a whole new way of looking at me, thoughts, experience, and the world, basically, by not taking my thoughts all that seriously. And it was immediately batted down with, that's just CBT. Cognitive behavioral therapy, by the way. I know labels don't matter, but when people, psychologists mostly I find, are firmly stuck in a different way of thinking, I found it so difficult to eloquently put how this way, your way, is different. I want to be able to point out the turning point in my complete recovery from mental health issues through this understanding. So far, I've just had a lot of skepticism and dismissal that it constitutes anything. It doesn't matter for me. I know and see what I know and see, and I keep saying more. But when I'm constantly being questioned about my mental health state, it would be helpful to have a way of clearly differentiating. It certainly feels very different to CBT in my experience, but how is it? I'd be so grateful if you have any tips on this. So, first of all, awesome, Diana, that you're doing so well and that it continues to get better and better. That's my experience as well, and what I see in a lot of people. And by better and better, it's just like we just keep seeing that it is thought and it is safe and it is okay and it moves on its own, and that just all of this stuff that felt and looked so serious, so personal, isn't. And that absolutely keeps getting more and more natural and better and easier. It just leads to so much change, such a different experience for people the more we're around this. So I love that that's your experience too. Super happy to hear that. So it's so interesting. Like, your question is such a good one. And the thing is, I mean, ultimately, it's like, how do you describe this in a way for those people, like psychologists or other people that are firmly rooted in this old paradigm of mental illness and people don't change all that much and all of that kind of stuff? How do we speak about what we know to be true and what we've experienced in a way that they can hear? And there's kind of two parts to that. There are some things we can point toward, which I will mention, I'll talk about. But there's also kind of the bigger sense that we have no real control over what other people hear, even when we explain things that in a way that really cuts to the root of it. Like we can say anything and we can do anything we want. And this is true for me, for you, for everybody. We can talk about this in all the different ways. And if someone, understandably, if someone is really entrenched in an old way of seeing things, an old way of thinking about things, they may not at all hear what we have to say. And that's not because we're doing anything wrong or because we're not describing it well or anything like that. They just might not be able to hear it because their thinking is so entrenched in this old way. And we all have so many examples of that from our lives, so many, where we just can't hear in any area of life, where we just can't hear what someone else is pointing us to because we're seeing through our own thinking, and our thinking is feels very sticky or feels very entrenched in something that we've maybe invested our life in or that feels safe to us at the moment. So I say that to just tell you up front, Diana, this isn't on you. You convincing other people or knowing the right things to say, I want you to see if you can take as much of that pressure off yourself as possible. And truly, like, I don't know how to say this either. I also cannot just go out to people in the world who are very entrenched in the psychology paradigm, in the old paradigm, and say something, especially in a soundbite, that's likely to do anything. It just isn't. It doesn't work that way for me either. So again, it's not just you, and it's not on us to convince anyone of anything, really. Although I hear you that it's to your benefit to be able to talk about this. I think sometimes the most we can do is say something that piques someone's interest, that gets them a little intrigued. And then we can maybe engage in a conversation if they want to do that, if they're open to that, where over time they can see more. And I want to talk about that for a second because it's really important. What we're sharing here isn't knowledge. Like, we could share the knowledge of it. We could share the soundbite, which is that, all human beings are absolutely perfectly healthy, and we just feel our thinking and we identify with that, misidentify with that, and we think we have problems. I mean, I could say it like that. I wouldn't expect that to do much. Again, for someone who's entrenched in the old paradigm or who just doesn't have much interest in this, if you say something like that, now the words I just said, as I see it, and as I think you see it, are absolutely true. And they're really profound, actually, when someone can hear it. But the words themselves are just words. So the words point to something that's absolutely true and that's absolutely profound, but they're just words. So for us to try to find the right combination of words that are going to do something, it's never really in the words anyway. But what we can do is engage in a way with other people that hopefully starts to pique their interest. So where I often find myself going with this, when someone says, oh, that just sounds like CBT, or it sounds like, mindfulness-ish or whatever, or it sounds like Buddhism or whatever, is to really kind of say, for me, what differentiates this is that we aren't viewing thoughts or feelings as a problem at all that need to be fixed. And pretty much all psychology is trying to fix thoughts and feelings and behaviors. Same thing. They're trying to fix psychology. They're looking at the psychology, so the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. They're looking at that output as the main thing. Like, that's where their focus is. Oh, you don't feel well. You're having negative thoughts. You're doing unwanted behaviors. Let's fix that. Now, how we see it in the new paradigm, or how I see it anyway, is like I wrote about in Just a Thought, there's like an assembly line of psychology being produced constantly our entire lives. And the old paradigm is kind of staring at what gets spit off the end of that assembly line. There's the thought. Is it a good one or a bad one? If it's a bad one, let's change it. Here's the behavior. Do we like it? Do we not like it? So it's like they're standing at the end of this assembly line trying to catch everything that gets spit off and trying to do something with it, right? That has a certain logic to it. When that's where our focus is in psychology, it makes sense that we're going to see some of it as problematic and some not, and to try to manipulate and do things with it. Where we're standing is way back, so that we see the whole assembly line. We see that there's a process. We don't care so much what gets spit out the end. I couldn't care less if it's a happy thought or a sad thought or a nice behavior or a unnice behavior, because that's just the end result. That's just what's getting spit off the end. It comes and it goes. The focus for us, or for me anyway, when I think about this, is bigger. It feels it's more on the whole process, and I'm curious about how that assembly line works. Not the specifics of what's coming down it, but what's the source of it? What powers it? What's the bigger system in which this assembly line works? For us as humans, that's where we're talking about, well, what's our default state here? What's our innate nature? What does that look like? How does a mind work? Where does thought come from? How does thought work? And when we see that thought is just constantly moving through, bringing things to life, bringing experience to life, again, that in itself is juicy. Like, that's where we want to look, rather than the specific stories and content and details in that thought. So again, as you can tell, this isn't something that when a potential employer says to you, hey, Diana, how come you used to have a ton of anxiety and now you say you don't anymore? How do I know it's not going to come back? You're going to start talking about assembly lines. I mean, you're probably not, you're going to share whatever makes sense to you. But I think often when someone says to you, oh, that sounds like CBT, or that sounds like this or that, we can say, well, it's not really, because where we're looking here is before psychology. We're not in the pool of psychology splashing around trying to fix psychology. We're backed up from it. We're seeing what comes before psychology. We're seeing that we live in a sea of psychology, but what else is there? What else is there? What's always true before the psychology part that's always coming and going and changing? We're seeing our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors as just outcomes. They don't ever need to be fixed. They're never problems. They're just showing us maybe our state of mind, or they're showing us how life is expressing what's being manifested in that moment. But our focus is before all that. Our focus is bigger than all of that. So in like a systems theory kind of thinking, we're backed up and we're seeing a bigger system where thoughts, feelings, behaviors, they're just aspects, they're just pieces of it. They aren't kind of the main show. We're seeing things in a much, much bigger way. That's why people talk about this understanding, this newer paradigm, as spiritual as well as psychological, or maybe just spiritual, because we acknowledge that there's psychology there, but we're not trying to do anything with it. It's why we have so much focus on the formless rather than just the form, not just what's coming off that assembly line, but the bigger context. So I wanted to use this opportunity to share a bit about that for you and for everyone to kind of get a feel for. But again, I really acknowledge that this is not really an answer to your question, Diana, because I'm not thinking that, when you have a few minutes with someone, you're going to get into all this in a way that they can hear. But the more you have a bigger sense of it, the more you're likely to say something in the time and the permission you have, that maybe piques their interest. And maybe it's just like, I tried the psychology route for a long time and it felt like I was kind of chasing my tail. It didn't ultimately help me. But when I saw the truth about thought, or what's there beyond thought, that's what changed everything for me. And hey, by the way, I know it sounds like CBT or whatever you think it sounds like, but if you'd like to talk more about this, I'd love to have a conversation with you. That's how most of my conversations end. And sometimes they continue. Sometimes that person says, yeah, I'd like to know more about this. And a lot of times they don't. And that's okay. That doesn't mean we did anything wrong. It doesn't mean we can't describe it. It is inherently indescribable. What we are pointing to is inherently indescribable. It is not a fact or a little bit of knowledge that we can just give away. It's pointing to before knowledge, really, which is pretty hard to talk about. It's pointing to that space before knowledge, before opinions, before facts, all of that. So I hope this gives you something helpful, Diana. And for everyone else, thanks, Diana, for sending the question, because for everyone else, this bigger context might really help this kind of make sense a little bit more. So thanks so much for listening. Send your questions to askamy@thelittleschoolofbigchange.com, and I'll see you back here next Monday. Have a great week.